Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So, as you will already have heard in Daniel's intro, we have today the distinct pleasure and privilege this episode of discussing Tantra, Taoism, sexuality, spirituality, healing with Sureya Leonara. Thanks so much for joining us, Sureya.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah. Um, so we talked a little bit off mic, full disclosure, with the idea of talking about a few things, definitely talking about what Tantra and Taoism means to you, because it obviously
Mhm.
was those things were very transformative to you, and you have a great origin story around this. And also really talking about how you've used this to work with, your clients and people that you're helping now that you have all this stuff. But first we thought we would like jump in and really go deep origin story, in that, it's not, we like to do this thing because it's sort of how people found their path. Partially because it's not only interesting, like how did someone find their path to that place, but also hopefully because it's helpful to other people and maybe inspiring to people to help them, kind of go, oh, this other person did this thing. Maybe I can find my own way too in my own way. The inspiring aspect of the story. And when I was listening to, some of your things, which I really loved, um, it was obviously it's not an obvious thing that people are going to become interested in Tantra and Taoism and sexuality in this particular culture. Most people don't grow up in tantric Taoist households. So I thought, we talked a little bit beforehand. Maybe we'd start a little bit there. I mean, what was it like in the house where you grew up? Did you grow up in a house with a lot of spirituality? Did you grow up in a lot of house where like some of these things were in the air, or was it more like you came through this more on your own? I'll leave it open, but that's always kind of interesting. How do people get to from where they started to where they are, I guess.
I love this question because I was just talking about it with a friend on a hike today, actually. And I grew up in the Midwest in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a Catholic family, very Catholic conservative family. And so I, it's interesting. I didn't really resonate with Catholicism. Well, at the time as a kid, I was pretty programmed. I was like a very good student, and I showed up for school and I did what I was told. But for some reason, going to church school, like I didn't have that same attitude. I was kind of checked out, and I'd ask my dad questions like, "Wait a minute, okay, so all of humanity came from the incest of Adam and Eve and their sons. Like, what's going on here?" And I'd ask him these kinds of questions, and it didn't really add up to me. But I would say it was really in my teens, around 15, I started exploring a lot with psychedelics, and that kind of popped me open and gave me my first sense of self that was kind of underneath all the programming and conditioning. And luckily, I mean, I feel like I definitely was shamed for my sexuality and different pieces of who I was growing up, but for whatever reason, it didn't really stick with me. I feel like I came out of the Catholic upbringing relatively unscathed in that sense, although I did definitely get imprinted with a lot of like people pleasing tendencies and being like the good Midwestern girl type of thing. But psychedelics really cracked me open. And what was fun was later on when I did start studying Tantra and Taoism, I felt like they put words to things that I experienced in my psychedelic journeys. And it all started just kind of reaffirming everything that I had experienced.
Oh, I hadn't heard that part about this, the psychedelics part. I did a little bit of listening to kind of find out parts of this, but that didn't come up. Daniel is like our super passionate about that. We did an episode where I talked about my LSD experience, which was transformative.
Mm-hmm.
But well, okay. I mean, you want to ask something about that, Daniel? Because it's so much your wheelhouse. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's always interesting when people use psychedelics, I think, outside of ceremonial space, which is probably far more common than not. People are
Mm-hmm.
experimenting, and I think that there is such a power to that. But I think working with it more and more as time goes on is when you do things intentionally, there's even more opportunity there for learning and growth. And so it's just but it is they're their own teachers. It's a teacher, they have their own way of doing things. And I think if used with the right amount of karma or possibility, like things can really crack open. It's cool. Do you I don't want to out you or anything like that, but do you still experiment, I guess I could say? Are you still a cosmonaut or something like this?
I was definitely a psychonaut for a really long time. And and then shit into plant medicine, ayahuasca, things like this when I was 21. And so I got started on it all pretty young and really deep for a long time. And I'm 33 now, and I've been on a long break from it all for, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years. It's not something that has called to me in recent years. I feel very content, but I feel like I received so much from it for, half my life. Really, it shaped me in so many ways, and I'm super grateful for it. And I'm sure I'll get called back in some form or another at some point. But I just listen for when the calling comes, and
Yeah,
otherwise there's no really desire outside of that. Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And I feel that thing on the
Mhm.
karma thing too. You're using that word, Daniel, because sometimes I feel like the karma's sitting there and then something comes and just pops it, right? So maybe
Mm.
that's
Mm.
a psychedelic when you're a teenager, or you get exposed to something else, and then the karma's just waiting to go pop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess like the follow-up, like I would ask on that is, do you feel like it's hard, but do you feel like some of the things that you had the experiences when you were younger that you have the words more for them now? Like, what do you think happened there? Any words for what the experience was when
Wait,
you were a teenager? Now that you have the Tantra, were you experiencing the oneness of things or the underlying bliss of things or that kind of stuff?
it was very, very much the oneness, the interconnectedness, seeing everything as one living, breathing consciousness fractaled out into all these different forms, and experiencing that on so many levels. And then, I mean, yeah, really the non-dual lens of Tantra and Taoism has been such a huge, important piece of my process and my life journey. And so I felt like that really put into words some of what I had been experiencing, but didn't totally know how to put words to when I was younger.
Yeah, wonderful use of the word fractal. The
Mm.
fractal nature of things, right? The mandala, different
Yeah.
levels of scale. All right, on the Catholicism thing, it didn't stick with you, I guess you said. How do you feel about like I think full confession, I come from the Catholic background, Daniel too. We all
Mhm.
tend to deal with the things of this. You say you kind of walked out like smoothly transitioning in some ways away around the sexuality
Mhm.
things and things like that. What do you think about with the clients that you work with? Tell more of your story, but as far as the client part, do you think people carry a lot of that baggage that you see? And
Oh, so much.
yeah,
So much. Yeah, I work with a lot of people around religious trauma, and religious trauma is such a wild, it's like its own animal, Like I had one client who him and his sister would cry themselves to sleep every night, because they were, told that if when the rapture came, if they weren't good, like they were going to be left behind and
yeah,
left here to be hunted, and all their family would be gone, and they would wake up living in this giant dilapidated barn, in the middle of Texas, and they wouldn't be able to find their parents in the morning. And the rapture had happened, and they had been left behind. And so it's like so much bigger than just, oh, I'm rejected by my parents or rejected by society, but by God, by the divine itself. And it's pretty wild to see, yeah, how deeply that can become patterned into people and their trauma and affect their lives on so many different levels.
yeah, it's a profound way to put that. I haven't always thought about the feeling of being rejected by God, but I guess that's true, right? People would carry that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just my family or the church or the community. Like you could carry that deep where the source of everything is going to reject me. Yeah, I guess that's part of Catholicism, I suppose. Retrospectively
Sure.
speaking, but the way you say that's really nice. That's a powerful way
Mm-hmm.
to put that. People can carry that in some unconscious way, I suppose, right?
And I think that's one of the things I really loved about Tantra is it places the divine within all things instead of this separate thing that we can be rejected from or abandoned by. And in between Catholicism and the spiritual lens that I have now, I had like a short atheist period where I was like, all of this is bullshit. And then, psychedelics started opening me up to, oh, there really is something going on here. But yeah, like I feel the divine in me and in you and in all things. And it's not this, separate thing that we have to go to church for to experience and have somebody middleman it. And it just, it made more sense. It resonated in my body more to feel it
Mm-hmm.
in all things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a deep transition too, because that kind of new atheist thing, going back to spirituality, isn't always easy for people. I think sometimes the people when they get in the atheism thing, they get a little stuck in it somehow. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I know, was that hard for you, or did you roll through that too?
I think I was a lot happier once I tapped into, the magic of what's going on,
Okay.
and that's
Yeah.
interwoven into everything. I think the atheism chapter, like I was definitely angry and angsty and lost and still kind of finding my sense of self. And I think things started to make more sense and flow better once I tapped into something bigger than myself.
Did you feel the resistance from like your family and stuff as you started to move away? Were people, was that a thing? Because it sounds like you didn't carry aspects of the sexual aspect, but you were trying to be a nice person, you know, good
Yeah.
girl person or good guy person, good boy person. Was that hard to
Yeah.
challenge the family?
I think I started questioning the existence of God right before my confirmation into the Catholic religion. But my grandpa, who I was really close with, he was really excited to like help me choose my confirmation name and go through that process with me. And I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna go through with it. Like it's really no sweat off my back to just like I've already done these 8 years of Catholic school. Like I'm almost done with it. It's gonna make grandpa happy. I love grandpa. So I just went through with it, and then secretly was like, but I don't believe in any of this. And he died a year later, and so I was really happy that I just went along with that. But then I remember telling my dad, and he was very crushed. And we really didn't see eye to eye on that for a while. And then I certainly just started getting weirder and weirder as time went on, and traveling around the world and working with plant medicine. And I had dreadlocks for a long time, and like my family was kind of like, okay, she's on one. And I think over time, like we've come to understand each other on a deeper level, and accept our differences.
Yeah, I have to say,
I'm sure the
I'm sorry.
removal of the dreadlocks helped a lot with the relationship with your family.
I think they were quite pleased about that.
I don't know how it was for you, Daniel. I definitely confirmed for my grandma. That was a thing. Like this, like I was like, don't do it for your old relatives. They were wagging their fingers. Monsignor O'Day and all that, like all the Irish angry Catholics that we were around.
Yeah, I never was made to do that. I never did that actually. I mean, like my family is still totally involved, and actually, like cousins my age and younger, they're very involved in the church right now, like very, very involved, which is even maybe even more so than their parents were, when I was a child. But I know because my mom had sort of, I don't know, unsettled emotions about being in the church, and she was much more of a seeker, that I had the exposure to like one aspect of the family that was very church driven, and then my mom, which was very not at all. It was like a very counterculture kind of person. And so I was able to kind of be in one, like have one foot in one hand, or one foot on one road and then another foot on a stream of consciousness going in a totally different direction, and somehow able to maintain. But I think that, much like yourself, Sureya, like I had difficulties with my family as well, especially around like intensely emotional times when somebody would pass. Then you have to have these discussions with people that just end up coming up about life and philosophy and divinity and all this other kind of thing. And it ends up that your beliefs now are being brought to the surface. And I would love to hear how it was for you, but I could say for myself, in those moments, it really clarified what I was thinking and then what I was trending towards in terms of my own personal belief and my own understanding at that particular time. And even though those conversations were not, I would say from an observable standpoint, were not productive in a sense, like there was a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of motherfuckers dropped, you know what I'm saying? But it ended up being that I was very firm in my belief. And even if people didn't believe in what I believed in, they believed that I believed it. It's a lot of belief words, but I hope that, so if you have some, further illumination on your experience with that, I think it's helpful for people who want to, maybe get away from some of the influence of their family, whether it be conscious or unconscious,
Sure. Yeah, I think it was interesting. There was a period of time where I was incredibly obnoxious and, trying to project all these things that I was learning and these awakenings I was having onto my family and get them to understand. And they didn't want to hear it. And it was so annoying to them, and understandably so. I think it's important to not be forceful in the way that you project your opinions and viewpoints onto people. And I was young and obnoxious in that way. And I think there kind of became a balance point where I realized it wasn't my job to like change them or teach them anything. And then it also wasn't my job to conform to what they felt or what they thought. And so there was a period of time that I didn't go home to Ohio for 8 years. Actually, I just went back for the first time a few years ago. And so I've been becoming closer with my family over these past years, but I had a period of time where there was a lot of friction, and I was like, I'm not going to travel all the way back here for you guys to bitch about things that I'm doing, or like
Right.
it's fine if you disagree with it, but I'm not going to like keep tolerating it. So I'll just be over here, and when you can let that go and we can just be as we are, we can spend more time together. And I think that kind of shifted things for all of us. We took our space, and now I think pretty cool with our differences.
Yeah, I think given time, that stuff will heal. People just need some time around that and some ability to establish identities of who they are, right? Yeah.
Totally.
There's an old Pretender song. I went back to Ohio. I don't know if you ever listened to the Pretenders. Is that a big thing for people from Ohio? I don't know. I always like Chrissy Hind of the Pretenders. You've ever
I
heard
don't
this?
know that song actually.
Oh, okay. Maybe you can check it out later. I went back to Ohio and she just talks about what it's like to going back to Ohio. I don't know. It just reminded me.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. She's coming to Chicago soon. Pretenders. Okay. Well, I guess so you were already kind of on this road even before, because when I was listening to what you were talking about, the big transformative window seems to be in your early 20s for you, right? That's when things really flip. Was that when you were moving from your atheist period back to your spiritual period, or?
The atheist period was pretty young. I would say that was like 8th grade to 10th grade kind of thing. It was
wow,
very
okay.
short. Yeah. And
That's really gonna make everybody mad.
Yeah, totally. So I feel like I started coming into my own spirituality around 15 with the onset of psychedelics. And then, yeah, I went down to the Amazon for a couple of months when I was, I guess, 20, 21. I was doing a school program down there, and we were staying with Shipibo villages and research stations and learning about ayahuasca and seeing it growing everywhere. And like as that was happening, I was starting to have some pretty crazy health issues that I didn't know where they were coming from. They were, and then I was traveling through Central America, and I started doing medicine work, and I started studying just every different pocket of healing that I could get my hands on, just taking different classes and workshops and trying to figure out what's happening with my health and tying that to my spirituality, like really starting to understand energetic, emotional, psychological roots of health issues. And then yeah, it was a couple of years of traveling and trying to figure out my health stuff. And then the health stuff finally came to a head. I eventually found out that I had Lyme's disease and mold toxicity and some co-infections and just kind of this whole mess of chronic illness stuff. But through that, I lost my libido, and I was also experiencing pain during sex. And so I was like, well, this is a problem. I'm 22 years old. And at the time, I was really bitter. I was so pissed off that I had Lyme's disease and I was dealing with this. I was really in this mentality around it. But I had actually been dabbling in Tantra and Taoism a little bit, reading some books and things like this. I had been curious about it for a while, but then started diving deeper into it to address some of the sexuality piece, and then found that it was so much bigger than sexuality, that sexuality was just a tiny piece of these lenses. But it really helped with my sexual healing process, giving me practices to work with my sexual energy, to de-armor, to move through sexual trauma, as well as I really think the non-dual lens helped me so much with coming out of this victimhood and thinking this was happening to me, and actually seeing, wow, this is awakening something really profound within me. It's leading me to something I'm really passionate about. And I can either have sympathy, which there was a part of me very much wanting sympathy, feel sorry for me, that was kind of getting this cheap high from it, or I can heal, and I can choose to work with this and be empowered, but I can't have both. Like I really need to make a choice here and choose to work with this in my favor. And so that shifted a lot within me and my whole consciousness and how I lived my life and interacted with, bad things that were happening to me, so to speak.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that. That's a cool fucking story, by the way. We listen to a
Thank
lot of
you.
people talk, and that's a cool fucking story. I didn't know you were actually down already in the Amazon doing that, exploring before you knew that, the health things were going on. So you were already on a path already, right? It just happened that this thing kind of cropped up. And, Daniel and I being, both clinical people ourselves, Lyme's disease is no joke, by the by. It can be really disruptive, obviously. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Sucks.
serious deal. It sucks. It
Yeah,
sucks.
it's a very like interesting from a physiological standpoint, in that it really can affect so many different facets of one's health that it's almost
Mm,
hard to pin down. Obviously some of the major symptoms like fatigue, brain fog, which is so common amongst anything, but there's this like, it almost has like an invincibility around treatment, and
mhm.
certainly would love to hear, your experience with that if you want to open it up a little bit. But from people who we've treated, from my experience, and I have a couple friends who have unfortunately, have dealt with this, there is such a strong drive to want to improve for obvious reasons that it almost
Mm,
pushes people's sanity
yeah.
to where you're like, oh, well, I read that this one person healed themselves by bleeding the tips of their fingers every day. So yeah, of course I'm going to do that, and then, but on the outside, we're like, I don't know about all of that. Maybe something, you know what I'm saying? But like for the people who are going through it, and I'm sure that is probably experienced by people who have chronic illnesses, that you're willing to
Mm,
do anything, and that might be even detrimental to you in the process and could even harm relationships, but you're not concerned about relationships, you're concerned obviously with one's health. So if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit, I'm sure we have people who would love to hear a little bit.
yeah. It took a long time. I guess not as long as some people. It took maybe like 2 years to diagnose. But I went to like so many different types of practitioners. And what was confusing was one of the first symptoms was migrating joint pain. And it would just be, suddenly like excruciating pain in the right wrist and then the left wrist and the knees. And people were saying the most idiotic things to me. Like I went to chiropractor about it and they're like, I think you just injured yourself and you don't remember. And so a lot of like kind of bullshit gaslighting like this.
Yeah.
So I was really infuriated by not understanding medicine well enough to be able to help myself fully, but then knowing that I knew my body so much better than a lot of these practitioners that I was working with, and they weren't
Hmm.
trusting like what I understood about my body.
Hmm.
And it was a naturopath who specialized in Lyme that figured out it was Lyme in Oregon 2 years into this process. And yeah, I was so disheartened by the diagnosis. Like on one level, I was relieved to finally know what I was dealing with, and then on another level, was just so upset about it. And it was all consuming. It was depressing. Like I went through a couple years of just being really, jealous of my friends who were traveling the world and I was at home sick and I was so deep in medical bills. And the naturopathic approach was very intense. I mean, I was on 50 different types of supplements per
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And, I did IV ozone and vitamin C and glutathione and artemisia 3 times a week for 3 months. And I did venom injections and I mean, everything. So yeah, it was all consuming. It was, financially so exhausting. And then I kind of got in this health wealth loop where it was like I'd be trying to make enough money to pay for the expenses to tend to my health, but then by working too hard, I would deplete myself and then
So
make the
yeah.
health situation worse. So then I'd be like, well, fuck it, I'm going to stop doing this for a while. And then eventually would be like, oh, well, now my health is tanking again. So I'd kind of like go back and forth in that loop. And honestly, Chinese medicine was a huge breakthrough for me in just one, having a different mentality about how I was looking at it. I had a Chinese medicine doctor in Colorado who was like, we're not going to look at this as like we're chasing down the pathogen of Lyme and trying to
Hmm.
kill it. We're going to support your body, and where it's blocked, your body already knows how to do what it needs to do. And lots of people have Lyme that aren't sick from it, that just like have it within their body, but their body is functioning. So he's like, we're supporting the body rather than going on this wild goose hunt to pin down this pathogen and kill it off. And that just felt so relieving to me. Like my whole nervous system settled in response to that explanation of like, yeah, I don't want to be taking 50 things trying to kill this thing off. And now my lymphatic system is bogged down. And now, like all these things. I was so neurotic about it. Yeah. And I was on a really strict diet. And the stress of all of that was so much worse than like now I'm about it. I'm very balanced about it. I'm definitely healthier than I was. I definitely still have issues with it. I still work with a Chinese medicine practitioner every week. But my mindset and my approach to it is so different. And I think that's been a huge part of my healing process as well.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Surreal. I mean, that's a deep story, and I think it's good for other
Yeah.
people to hear that, you go through those journeys, but you can come out the other end, right? Yeah. That's deep to
Mm,
share. Okay. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So, okay, I can like talk about a little bit how this Taoism thing was for me. So my thing was I was very sick as a teenager too. And it was
Wow.
that experience where your body stops being a source of like enjoyment and becomes this source of like a drag. And it was you have a lot of
Mm,
pain and a lot of discomfort. And there's really something amazing about finding a spiritual path that says you can feel bliss and pleasure through this whole thing again. So is that part of how your
mm.
experience was too? Was it something like that?
Definitely. I think when I lost my libido, I noticed I also lost part of my zest for life. And I was like, oh, there's a connection here. And that was really fascinating for me to feel. And to also learn that body was just communicating with me, not working against me, I think was another really huge realization through it, because this is how our body knows how to communicate, right? So if we can learn it's somatic language and get curious about what are you trying to
Mhm.
tell me about where I'm out of alignment. Like that was a really huge piece too, is recognizing, even, I work with people a lot on sexual dysfunctions, and it's rarely in my experience actually a medical issue. It's somewhere like emotional, psychological, and once we heal that root, the other piece self corrects. And so um yeah, I think, sorry, I don't remember what your exact question was, but
Well, finding pleasure in the body again is like difficult after
yes,
living through all that illness, right? It's been such a
right.
horse of hassle, right?
Yes, and pleasure is so healing. So like when you
Yeah.
can find that again, I think it's so beautiful to have that amidst all the pain.
Yeah, I have like a psych degree before my Chinese medical degree, and I began to get, as I was doing the Zen, which had a lot of like what you would call kidney yang building from the Chinese medical point of view, or like Kundalini breathing in it. It was a little bit
Mm-hmm.
unusual style of Zen. It was a lot of like building this energy, which is very sexual, you know,
Mm-hmm.
too. So I could feel like, ooh, this is pleasurable too. And then some of the retreats I did, I came out and I was like, I can feel the sexual energies going, even though it's supposed to be doing the Zen thing. Like, you spark that yang in yourself, right? And you feel it, that inner fire. But it was like a big deal for me because I started to think, oh wow, like part of what in the psychology for me, what I began to think was that's one of the most healing things you can find, way back into that sexual joy and pleasure and like joie de vivre, if you want to be French about it or something, that joy in life that comes from having that fire and that yang and that passion that's sexual, but also like like I think what I really like what you're always saying with this creative and inspiring
Mm-hmm.
too, right? You make the connection between those things. That makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah. It's our creative life force. It's what we're made out of. And so if we're finding ways to stir that, of course we're going to feel more alive. We're more connected to our vitality and to this very essence that we were created through.
Yeah, the doctor I studied with from China, when he came to the United States, he thought Americans weren't happy enough. They didn't
Mm.
have enough fire. It was a very interesting thing. He thought this is not that happy of a culture. And he had come from China and had grown up in like the Cultural Revolution and all the internal chaos. So when he got here, I think he expected to find like a bunch of like relatively comfy, happy people. And he was like,
Uh-huh.
no, these people are burdened. And, the financial things you were talking about with your illness, people, financial pressures. And he just didn't find it to be a joyful culture. So I almost feel like the Tantra and Taoist thing helps you tap into something a little bit more joyful that sometimes the culture lacks. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I think it helps enormously with that. And even just having tools and practices that can help you access that, just working with the breath intentionally. I mean, that's not something most Americans learn how to do unless they go down some sort of like Eastern spiritual path. But the breath is always available to us. There's so much we can do to change our state of being right here, right now, wherever we are. And I think that's one of the really cool things about it too, that most people don't know that they have access to that.
Soraya, if Eric, if you're cool, how, I mean, so we're clinicians. We work with people. You work with people. If you wouldn't mind maybe giving us a little bit of a background, or I guess foreground, into the work that you do now with people.
Sure. I work with a lot of different types of people around a lot of different types of issues. I call myself a holistic sex and relationship coach, but it's kind of even hard to like narrow it down to that. And I say holistic because I do see our sexual energy as being interwoven into everything that we are. And we're in relationship with everything all the time. So sometimes somebody comes to me because they're having like an erectile dysfunction issue or premature ejaculation, and we're working on things around their relationship with money or their confidence or their body image or their relationship with their wife, or something that happened in their childhood, and it's all interwoven. So I don't see any issue as something that can be isolated to just the bedroom. It's always connected somewhere else. And so we're getting into every corner of their lives, even if they are coming specifically for a sexual issue. But some people are coming more because they just got divorced, or they're on the brink of divorce, or they're wanting to deepen their connection and tap into like a more spiritual connection with their sexuality. Some people have trauma, some people have porn addiction. So I work with all different kinds of things, but we're always weaving into these different areas of life. And I work very somatically, working with the body as a map to the unconscious to see where energy is stuck. And, I think a lot of talk therapy can be kind of more just hitting that tip of the iceberg, working on the conscious level. And so I'm trying to get deeper and, find where are these holding patterns within the body, and rewiring that on a deeper level. So we do a lot of practices with the body, with breath, with meditation. I always give them things to do in our time and space apart. And it's a very deep repatterning that I find to be really effective and really cool to see where these different things are rooted. A lot of times people come to me thinking their body is broken. And I feel at this point very blessed that I went through the experience of thinking the same about my own body. Like I had doctors tell me like, oh yeah, I have clients who just don't have sex anymore. And like, you might be one of those people. And it was such a terrible thing to hear, but absolutely soul crushing. But I was like, fuck no, that's not going to be me. And I just refuse to buy that narrative, and to keep leaning in and trusting my body and getting curious and learning her language. And I have lost connection with my libido multiple times since that first time. If I'm like in overdrive, I'm burnt out, too in my yang, like my libido will tank, and that's my body way of letting me know that I'm out of balance. So, I thank my body for that, and I lean into what do I need for deeper self-care, and coming more into that yin field. But I think it's really helpful for people to see that even if your body has felt like it's working against you for a long time, it's everything is still working. The body is incredibly resilient and can bounce back, as I'm sure you guys have seen so much in your own work.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get, I mean, it's a fascinating story because I guess we'll talk more about what you got from Tantra and Taoism as we go, but we did a little of the clinical thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you were working on yourself, and then somehow you transitioned to working with other people. How did you make that transition move? I mean, it's kind of fascinating for a couple of clinicians. We got a lot of people who are clinical people who listen to this too. So how did that work for you when you translated, like, okay, I'm healing myself. Okay, now I'm going to pass this on to other people. How did that play out for you?
I went like a very underground, unconventional route to it. I had different Tantra teachers, different Taoist teachers that I studied with very extensively. And then, one of them was one of the courses specifically designed for working with other people. And then I did a sex and relationship coaching certification program, and just continued studying from lots of different angles with lots of teachers. I would do workshops on like somatic experiencing and parts work and things like this, and just taking the things that I found really worked for me, that I was really curious about, and just diving into lots of different things and then weaving them together into an offering. And yeah, it's turned out to be a really beautiful cocktail of modalities. And I'm really glad I went that route, because there was a time where I was like, shit, should I be going to school for psychology? Or, because I actually didn't finish college. I did my first 3 years, and then I had the health issues come up, and then I got taken on this path. And so it didn't make sense for me to go back. But I did have the curiosity at one point of, should I go and get my degree in psychotherapy or something like this? But I'm really glad I didn't go that route, because I have friends who are therapists who refer a bunch of their clients to me because they're limited in what they're allowed to work on in the realms of sexuality, or they're limited in their training or whatever it is. And so they send a lot of those clients to me. And I feel like I have a lot more freedom to do things in the way that I want to, and to design my own path with it.
Yeah, I had that thing too
Yeah.
when I was doing the Zen. I just took like 3 years. I finished my psych undergrad and I was like, I'm not going to get this degree. That's no. I made that decision too. But then it was like, okay, where do I go from here? I know I want to like work with people. I want to try to heal people. And so that's a struggle. You know, if you do want to heal people or help to share these kinds of things, you're already kind of in an out of the box path and you have to kind of find your own way. And I think it sounds awesome. You were able to go through and kind of like, okay, fuck it. I'm going to design my own path and I'll clear this out for myself. That's very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy I went that way. It worked out well.
Yeah. More of a straight line to get to what you really wanted to share with people as opposed to, okay, I'm gonna go all crooked just to kind of have it fit into maybe what might be the more social expectations of what it should be. But you seem like an out of the
Right.
box person at root. You're certainly
Very much
certainly
so.
willing to like follow your own path. Yeah.
Very much so. I think it's been a lot more fulfilling to go that way. I think I would have felt like limited in going through some like pre-carved out path. And I think that what I offer is very unique as a result. So
Did you ever feel scared about it? We bring it up because we talk a lot about, it's scary sometimes to do this thing. Okay, I'm going to like blaze my own trail. It's a little scary. How was that for you?
Yeah, it has been scary at points. It wasn't scary in the beginning. I mean, it was in certain ways. It was scary to like fully step into myself in that way and like trust myself to hold that space. And that was a process of like, slowly building capacity and not biting off more than I could chew. But I didn't have the fear of like, is this going to work out? Because I was like, I know this is what I'm supposed to do. This feels like what I'm designed for, what I'm passionate about. It lights me up. It feels like how I was led here was so on point. I wasn't doubting it. And then other people would kind of throw doubts at me. People like my dad, and my dad is a marketing professor and like, always wanted me to be a businesswoman. And now he's like, oh, wow, you're a successful businesswoman, but you did it a totally different way than I wanted you to. He was didn't finish college, but now he talks about me to his marketing students. So he doesn't like what I do. He tells them I'm a counselor. He's very, cringe crawling in his skin about what it is that I do. And we don't talk about the content of it. I think he just hates the idea of his daughter as a sexual being, period. So there's that, but yeah.
Yeah, I know with my dad, when I told him I was going to do Chinese medical stuff, he got completely silent. And then he said, that's about the craziest thing I've ever heard. And then more silence. But later on,
he did say, work on him?
What's that?
Does he ever let you work on him?
Oh, you know what? There's a whole dramatic story about he passed away in 2007. So, but like this is like a longer backstory, but I got to needle him one time. It was during hospice and I popped him out of a coma. My one time I got to treat my dad.
Yeah. Wow.
So we had been,
that's a really cool story.
He was unconscious I share it with students too. Daniel and I both teach. So I'm like, okay, you want to hear an acupuncture story? I'll share one, And so he was unconscious for days and it's, so demoralizing. And I just did the needles for him. It's a special treatment that we'll all just love the name of. It's called the Buddha's Triangle. So you can't love a treatment.
I used it last night. I used it
last night.
Yeah.
And he just popped out of the coma and we hung out for maybe 9-10 hours. It's awesome. So the one time I got to treat my dad, since you threw me that question.
Did he become a believer after that?
He woke up and he looked at his hands with these needles. And he was like, what the fuck is happening? And I pulled them all out and then we just hung out and listened to Rod Stewart or whatever. Like Rod Stewart. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's it's interesting to share because there's a bravery thing to go outside of the path, but obviously you felt like more like a calling thing. So that's probably where a lot of the source of the strength came from, or do you feel like it just came from just already the spiritual transformations in you? Like you went through a lot. To be sick, that's kind of scary. And then to say, okay, I'm going to heal myself and now I'm going to blaze my own trail. That takes courage.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was that it was such a calling. There's been different iterations that have certainly, there's been a lot of fear that I've had to overcome. Just things like putting myself out there to the world. So like when I started posting on social media about what I was doing and talking about sexuality, and my whole family is on Facebook, and I was just like, well, fuck it. Like, they're going to hear everything I have to say, and I don't really care what they think about it. But starting to like put my voice out there, and then, getting on podcasts, starting a podcast, teaching group workshop. I feel like each of these things was a new initiation of its own, where I had to push an edge more about just like building nervous system capacity around being seen. And then in the beginning, when I started working with clients, there was definitely a part of me that felt like I really had to plan, and I wanted to know what they wanted to work with in advance, and felt like I needed to make sure that I had the tools. But then what I came to realize very quickly is that if I'm being super present and I'm tapped into my intuition, I always know what to do, and I don't need to worry about it. And that's the most important thing. And so I learned to really trust myself on a deeper level. And, the longer that I work with people, I've been doing this for about 7 years, it's the more deeply comfortable I become with it. And I've learned so much from every single client I've ever worked with. And then that feeds into what I know to share with the next client.
Yeah, one of my favorite psychologists is like Carl Rogers, and we talk about him sometimes on the podcast, but he would say things like that, you could have a bunch of technical things, but in the moment, there's sort of just an authenticity. That's the healing thing. It's like, okay, I'm gonna come from this spontaneous, authentic place, and that will probably be right, that'll probably be the thing to do. So it sounds like you had some kind of thing like that happened in your work too. You started to realize, oh, as long as I'm in, it's the relationship that heals. He says that kind of stuff too. And it's, the spontaneity, the authenticity. Is that how it feels to you?
Definitely. Yeah. And being in the body, it's similar to a lot of the advice I give around people that are having performance anxiety in the bedroom. It's like, if you're too in your head, of course you're not going to be able to sense where your energy is and have any choice as to how it's moving through your body. It's always the same thing. If I was too in my head, I was going to be wrapped up in insecurities or fears of dropping the ball or not being good enough. But then like that was irrelevant because my focus needed to be on the client, right? So if I was just present in my body and listening, everything else from there would unfold as it needed to. And I find that's the case with most things in life.
I would be remiss if I didn't make some sort of joke about head and balls and such like this, but we'll leave that. It's too
someone had to say it. We all thought it. Someone had to say it.
I'm 9, leave me alone.
All right, so that gets to like, that part of your work too gets to like what you perceive as being obstacles that people have, So I don't know if it's an easy question to answer or not, but like, is there a certain number of lists, or maybe a list you can give to people, or like, okay, these are major obstacles that people seem to wrestle with.
Yeah.
These areas of sexual expression, sexual freedom, sexual positivity, sexual spirituality. Like, is there certain things you're like, well, these are things I really see people repetitively seem like they have these struggles with. You already talked about some of them, like being in your head a lot. And the other ones that you want to add to that list that you think would make it?
Yeah. Being in your head is a big one, especially like we have sex with our bodies, right? So we're stuck in our heads. And, the porn addiction epidemic is definitely a piece of that pulls people into their heads instead of their bodies too. Having an agenda, I find, is really problematic in the bedroom. A lot of people are on a very linear trajectory. They're very goal oriented, thinking that orgasm is like the point or what marks a successful sexual experience. And I think when we can get out of that and play with this much more nonlinear way of working with sexual energy, being curious, seeing where it takes us, and where we each are in this moment and what happens when we follow this thread of energy, so much more is possible. We can have such more multidimensional, rich, magical experiences than if we are like trying to get somewhere or projecting how we think it's supposed to go. And I think a lot of people have that problem, especially, I wonder what sex would be like if none of us had ever seen it on TV, movies, porn, anything like that. And if we were just truly tapped into the instinctual draw of our body and to follow that, where does this want to take me? That primal flow instead of these mental images of what is this supposed to look like?
Yeah, it really gets into the idea like the Taoist or the Buddhist thing of like conventional truth, right? You get these things that are kind of you learn from the culture and you internalize, and they kind of take over the show or something, right? And if you took those things away,
Mhm.
what would that look like? Yeah, I hadn't really thought of
Yeah.
it phrased in that way.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I don't know how it is for, I'll throw it out to all three of us, but like I think over time, what I realized, what I really wanted the most wasn't like some particular orgasm, though that's cool. But you just want to really like you want to share an experience with another person. You want to share love and you want to share connection. That's what you really want the most. But all this other stuff sometimes seems like it's like obscuring the scene. I don't know if that makes sense to y'all, but
It
it's been
does. It does. I think that's another hang up for people is like sometimes it's a interplay between their egos instead of actually like, hey, we're on the same team, sharing connection, working towards a shared intention of pleasure and play and connection. People forget to play sometimes. People can take it too seriously, get too wrapped up in their performance and how they're being perceived, or blaming the other person for not getting what they want out of the experience. And so I try to remember like people, hey, teammates as lovers, you're on the same team. What is your intention here? And can you come back to that and work together to have an experience that's enjoyable for you both?
I guess it's interesting because there's part of the Tantra thing, like I'm interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and some of it's a little technical,
Uh-huh.
visualizing things and all that. Do you get into that with people, or do you find that to be a distraction when you're trying to do more of your therapeutic work? Or how do you think about that part? Because there is that like little technical aspect of Tantra. Or you like, you kind of let that go when you're working with patients because the most important thing is to have them be able to be more spontaneous.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Certain practices I find can take people again out of the body and into the head when it's too technical. So I try to break things down into like really bite-sized steps or distill it in a way where it's like these are the most important parts. Sometimes it feels like there's a bunch of extra unnecessary steps where it's more like, okay, this is the essence of what we're working with. And even if I can just get them paying attention to their breathing and relaxing their bodies and cultivating presence, like that can go so far, and you don't always need all the fancy hoops to jump through. And so I try to like layer it in ways where it's like let make the one facet of it become second nature, so that like as you layer it on, it's not so complicated. Because yeah, that's the last thing we want to do is take them out of the body again and back into the mind, or feeling like it's this obstacle course or this like spiritual Olympics or this thing they have to get right. I like
Yeah.
to just keep it simple and in the body.
Like some of the Tantra can start to get that vibe. I have to like do this thing perfect or something, right? Like it can create that kind of thing a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I like to try to veer away from that and just like try to inspire people to again stay in their body and follow their intuition, because that's going to take you where you need to go. I think it doesn't need to be such a prescribed set of instructions of like do this, this, and this, and achieve this result, but more of an invitation of try this and see what happens. See where it takes you. And maybe it's time it takes you somewhere completely different. But can you trust your body in the moment and not be so attached to a result and just see what wants to unfold?
Is that what happened to you in your 20s? Was that what happened? I was thinking about it earlier when you're describing, okay, something transformative happened for you in that time period. You were wrestling with these illnesses. I know you had the Lyme's disease. I know you also talked about you had other kind of infections and all kinds of other things went kind of haywire at that time. And then you got
Mhm.
into the Tantra thing. Were there certain like meditations or exercises you were doing that time? We're flashing back a little bit, but were there things that were particularly powerful for you where you had like, oh, this is one of the things that really made it click for me? Or was it more
Yeah.
sort of us just refining your body in that more spontaneous way? Or what was it like when you were first doing that? Were there certain things that clicked?
One of the biggest ones was learning tantric massage as a therapeutic practice, where
Mhm.
genitals are often only touched sexually or medically, and so to work with them therapeutically in a de-armoring way, in the same way that if you have a knot in your shoulder and you massage it and you work it out, it's like the genitals can hold so much tension too, especially the vagina and the prostate gland, especially. Um, and so to when I was experiencing pain during sex, I was in this space of like, I don't want to have sex. I was just totally shut down to it. I avoided it. And this practice taught me that the only way around it is through it in every area of life. And that leaning into that pain courageously and gently, not blowing out your nervous system, not going towards more than what you have a capacity for, but leaning into it and pushing that edge in a healthy way, was really profound for unwinding a lot of the stuck energy in my body, things from sexual trauma, things from just all kinds of things within my system that needed to be released. And I went into that practice kicking and screaming. Like, I didn't want to do it. I was having so many things come up around it. And it ended up being a very beautiful practice for me. My first time went from like literally tears and resistance and tension to orgasm. And orgasm is not the point of the practice, it's a potential byproduct. Even pleasure doesn't have to happen. Like, sometimes it's painful. Sometimes you're working through points that hurt, that have tension, and you're just gently massaging through them. Sometimes there's numbness, and you're like restoring feeling to those parts of the body. But that practice was very profound for me, and it looked different every time I did it, doing it on myself or with a partner. And it taught me so much about what it is to lean into the things that we want to avoid, and how much medicine is hidden in those if we dare to go looking.
So this was even like sort of like the yoni massage kind of things, like really massaging in that way and letting yourself kind of go through whatever that experience was going to be, allowed that to kind of like transform through for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was kind of like, when I first got interested in the Taoist things, I kind of went Zen, Taoism, Chinese medicine, Tantra. That was sort of my flow with this. But like, even to know, like, you don't think of massaging your own scrotum. It never occurs to you. And Chinese people have thought of all of this. Obviously, in India, they thought of all of this already. So you're kind of like, I can do this. And they're like, yeah, and here's how you do it. And you're like, well, this is kind of amazing. And then you do discover those.
Yeah.
I had a lot of like, I had like a kind of an undiagnosed appendicitis that dragged on for years when I was a teenager. So it was a lot of pain.
Wow.
And pain in the pelvis, you know? So when I started really learning these things, it was like, okay, there's areas where there's some residual scar tissue and things I'm gonna have to work through, and some of this is uncomfortable. But then when you work through that, you find the pleasure parts too, right? And you have to be
Yes.
flexible with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how you spoke to that. And I think that's part of the medicine of this work, is like, I often talk about the scar tissue that gets built up between people in relationship, the things that the baggage that isn't dealt with that kind of gets stuffed under the rug, and it builds a scar tissue. And we have to get in there and massage it out. And, it's the same with our bodies. It's the same with everything in our lives. And so I think that all the things that I learned, like through these practices, through my body, through my sexuality, they translated to other areas of life. And so that was a big piece of it for me too, is like finding pleasure in moving through the pain, finding pleasure in deeper connection and moving through conflict with somebody, the closeness that can come of choosing to move through that. And just like you said, even all these things that have been thought of that we would never think to do, like massaging your scrotum, there's like, it opens up such whole new territory. I learned about all these different new types of orgasm, and then, tapped into like non-ejaculatory orgasm for men, which is one of my favorite things to teach, because it's such a mind-blowing, fun new horizon that just changes the game. And so it's fun to get to explore these new territories that I might not have dove into in the way that I did if I didn't have some crunchy shit to work through. So I think that, if we can stay curious about what's crunchy, what's painful, what we want to avoid, and lean into it, it's usually a very worthwhile journey.
Well,
Yeah, you're already big on. Oh, yeah, good.
How do people work with you? Are you mostly like in person, or are you online, or you do workshops, or how does that?
Mostly online these days. I did do a lot of in person when I was working in Colorado. I don't currently have an in-person office, so mostly online right now. I used to do a lot of in-person events, and I'm hoping to get back to that soon. I haven't actually done any since before COVID, but I have online courses as well. And then I work with a lot of people one-on-one or one-to-two if it's couples. And yeah, that's kind of the main way that I work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so I guess the other part was you obviously learned a lot from Tantra and Taoism yourself. Do you find that, I don't know, it's a weird question, but do you find that your clients find some of those same things that you found as you start working with them? Some of these more spontaneous realizations of that? And how has that played out? In the end, we do this podcast, We want people to have happy lives. We also like to help people get more and more enlightened, whatever that may mean for them. But, you know, so
Mhm.
how does that end up working in your work? Do you find that people kind of tap into those deeper parts of themselves?
Totally. People often walk away saying this went so much deeper than I anticipated.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Like, wow, I got way more out of this than like I was coming here because I thought I wanted to like, be a masterful lover. And what I got out of it was so much more than what I could have expected. That's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that comes through because yeah, people don't always realize how interconnected it all is. And then once we start pulling on this thread and we see how it, tugs on other ones in their lives and how it starts weaving this new tapestry, I think it's really profound to see the shifts that happen for people. I mean, I've had clients where it's like every area of their life transforms through our work together, from the career to their relationship to their health to their income to their spirituality to even having like a whole new life purpose path open up, um, to their sexuality, so many things. And they can become totally different people through this work. And I think
mm,
that's one of the really cool things to see is it's like, yeah, if you start playing with your life force in a different way and your sense of self and our whole understanding of existence, because I think that's a really interesting thing is if you're ashamed of your sexuality, at your core, you're ashamed of your very existence because we got here through sex. So that's a really big thing to unpack. And when you connect people with this understanding of their sexuality as sacred, they have a whole new origin story that then ripples out and informs everything that they're doing. So it's
mm.
pretty cool to see what people tap into and what opens up as a result.
That's a profound way to put that, to say if you're ashamed of your sexuality, you're kind of ashamed of your being in some very deep way, right? Because that's how we got
Mhm.
here, right? Yeah. And also, I
Yeah.
guess you can't feel comfortable with this universe from a tantric or, some of the Taoist points of view, because it's a yin yang, it's a Shiva Shakti universe,
Mhm.
right? There's a
Mhm.
sexuality at the core of it. So you're always going to be maybe somewhat cut off, right? If you
Right.
have that shame around that area of life. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what percentage
Exactly.
of Americans do you think feel ashamed about this, Sureya?
Oh wow. I don't know. A lot. A lot. I mean,
Yeah.
even people that don't think they're ashamed about sexuality, they still have pockets of it. Like one example was think about how grossed out everybody is to like, if you mention the idea of their parents having sex, and it's like, but that's literally how you were created. You literally shot out of your dad's penis into your mom's vagina and grew into a human. And so, like, let's be real. That's what happened. That's how we got here.
I would
And
I would like to think
go
that
ahead.
I would like to think that I was coerced to come out. I was a little resistant, but okay, fine.
Henry Miller has that bit in his book. He's like, why would I ever leave the womb? What's the point? He has a whole thing like that, the whole chapter about that. One of his,
Totally, it's cozy in there.
yeah, it's
And
Mhm.
nice.
then when you were birthed, I mean, you were totally encapsulated by your mom's vagina, unless you were born via C-section like me. But like the whole experience is very sexual. Like we're so close to that seed of sex when we're created. And so I think even like thinking, oh, it's disgusting that my parents have sex, like there's still that bit of shame woven into where we come from. So it's funny how deep it goes.
No, it's a good, very good observation.
Yeah, my mom's 84 and she's heading towards the twilight of her years. But we talk really
Mhm.
honestly about these things. And what was her experience of relationships? Did she ever think that she was in love with somebody else? Did she ever want to have sex? We talk about these things now,
That's awesome.
And I had the thought literally like a couple of weeks ago, like, oh, my parents having sex. Let me visualize that. Let's see if I'm okay with it. And I was like, I'm totally fine. I can even
It's really
imagine them in a
liberating
couple
to
of
get to
different
that point.
positions. I was like, okay, I can imagine them. They weren't pure missionary all the time. Let my mind go there. You realize you're fine. You don't
Yeah,
die inside. Yeah. Well, I
yeah.
guess on the deep part, I can remember when it really hit me, and Daniel and I have had these conversations. Like, there's a time when you start to realize, like, wait a minute, the whole universe is permeated by this yin yang Shiva Shakti thing. That's how, as above, so below. That's how this whole universe came into existence in in a tantric sense, right? It's born of like
Yeah.
from a pure source through
Mhm.
a yin and yang or a Shiva and a Shakti, and they interact, and voila, we all get to appear. The 10,000.
Yeah.
So I can remember when that really hit me super deeply in meditative ways, and I was like, wow, okay, so that's what we're feeling in this, right? We're feeling something at the core of everything. And I guess if you get to the deepest part of what you're talking about, if you're cut off from that, then you're cut off from something really primal, right? About
Totally.
creation almost.
Mhm.
Right. Even like a spiritual path that's disconnected from sexuality, it's like you're castrating you're taking the roots out of it, and it's incomplete. And I've had a lot of, especially male clients, come to me that are like, I've gone really deep down my spiritual path and meditation and all these things, but like I've still got some major shit with my sexuality, and it's time for me to deal with that. And I think you don't have a holistic, integrated understanding of spirituality until you're okay with your sexuality, because they're two sides of the same coin. You know, our sexuality and our spirituality is what makes us human. It's the conscious and the unconscious, the body and the spirit, and the masculine and the feminine. And I think that's that understanding of all of these polarities of two sides of the same coin is one of the other most profound things that I've received from Tantra and Taoism, and understanding how they work together and can complement one another and harmonize, even though they're total opposites. Because I did have a point where I was like, how the hell are men and women ever supposed to work together? It's like this cruel cosmic joke. We're total opposites. What is this? And these teachings helped me understand like how they work together to generate energy, and how they click together perfectly, and the whole universe is designed that way. You know, look at like the pollinators and the flowers, and even look at hardware where you've got like the masculine and the feminine part, and like our whole world is designed on these building blocks. And when you understand how they work together, I think everything just makes a lot more sense.
So I would like to kind of wrap here, but I want to do it for a reason, because if you're cool to do it, Sureya, I'd like to have you on, and Eric, I'd like for us to do a little bit of prep work, and maybe Sureya for you as well,
Sure.
to do an episode. We'll do foreshadowing, live foreshadowing. I mean, it'll be recorded, but we're doing it live for right now. To do an episode on cultivation practices, like sexual spiritual cultivation practices, you know, from our own work, and from things, you know, using various levels of teachings on tantra and all of its various definitions, and try and put, because I feel like, and again, I don't want to go too deep into a rabbit hole, because we don't like to do that at the end of things. um, I feel like the word tantra, the definition of it and the way that it gets used now, is not necessarily the classical way in which it was passed forward. And
Mm-hmm.
that like some of the more kind of traditional ways in which it gets used now are missing. And it's only sexual. It's a completely sexual practice only. But like, to why I like what you're saying is that like, no, it should be both. Like, it shouldn't be only spiritual or only sexual. I mean, that's literally the definition of the word, is to weave. So I would like
Mm-hmm.
to continue the conversation, but like begin with that as an opening, you know, begin with the sort of like tantric spiritual sexual practice as a mainstream of our conversation. If you're good to come back, we'll put you on the spot here.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
Okay.
I would
Well,
love to come
it's
back.
Sureya, you were a friend of the show after at Hello, you were a friend of the show because I looked at your videos and I was like, this shit's awesome. So just to give a shout out to, I don't look like you're doing as much YouTube stuff anymore than what I've seen, but like I did, like I'm gonna do some research. I looked through your YouTube things, and it's so refreshing to go to something where you're like, oh, I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in that one, I'm interested in that one, because you go into these very deep things, right? In this very
Mhm.
sincere and authentic way. And so, anyways, you know, you're always invited. You're a
Oh,
friend
I
of
appreciate that. No, you guys are so fun to vibe with as it's flowed so naturally. And yeah, and thank you for that. I do want to get back on the YouTube videos eventually, but one of my biggest things I've learned from all of this actually is just, you know, I heard somebody say one time that autoimmune disease is when the spirit gets ahead of the body and kind of leaves the body back in the dust. And I did a little bit of that with building my business. I kind of went too hard and was like in full blown yang creation mode. And then this past year and a half, I've really like come back into the yin, and in this gestation period of refilling my cup. And now I'm like coming back out with a more balanced pulse. And so that's part of being on your podcast and getting myself out into the world again, and it feels really good.
I did notice that because I was looking kind of at your social media and I was like, oh, it looks like, Sureya's gone a little yin. She's retracted a little bit. You sort of talked about that on the gram, and you can see like, okay. So I was like, oh, that's great. She's coming back out again, and we get to like, be part of that too. So I was very happy about that.
We try and be balanced, but this is definitely a yang den for sure. Like there's no
sure. Well, and you're men, so that makes more sense for you. But like I was kind of acting like a man for a while, and like I needed to like come back into my femininity and just recharge, and it feels really good. I moved from Colorado to Asheville, North Carolina. Like I'm in a much more yin place
great.
now.
Asheville's great.
It's lovely. It's super nourishing. Cells are hydrated in.
Oh yeah. My son Aiden just did a chess tournament down there like last weekend. It's really beautiful.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing, I just want to give a shout out to your YouTube thing with this, because it's the relationship part. Again, I'm just getting into it, but I really like that you're open to all kinds of relationship attitudes too. I was just listening to one of the ones you did where you're kind of talking more about poly things. And I was like, that's good, because you don't always see people being open to all the different ways that people could be. So just to give a shout out to that too, for people who might be listening and interested in that, there's a real openness to what you're doing, and it's great.
Yeah, and I'll leave links, Sureya, to all of your stuff in the description of this video, whether you're watching on YouTube or in the podcast, if you're listening to it on, Apple or wherever, Spotify or Pod Addict. I don't know. There's a lot of different places that we're broadcasting out of. So let me just give you guys one more moment here. Any parting shots, Eric, and then we'll let Sureya say something before we close it off.
No, I'm really glad that we got to talk about all the different range of things that we talked about, and there's obviously still more to say. So hopefully we'll see it some other time, Sureya. It's a blast. Thanks.
Yeah, this was so much fun, you guys. I really appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to dropping in more with you guys.
Yeah, no, totally. You're welcome back, and I will follow up with you and get you back on sooner rather than later, because there is something to be said about keeping the kind of conversation moving forward. So we look forward. Thank you for coming on today. Eric, always thank you for working with me on the spaceship, yeah, it's nice because I always say doing this kind of thing, Sureya, as you know, and Eric, as you know, and audience, if those people, if for some reason people feel I don't know, inspired by this conversation or any of the other, I don't know, several hundred that we have, to do a podcast, like totally do it, even though there's like 3.5 million of them or something else like this. It gives a really great reason for people to connect who normally wouldn't. Like I couldn't find, Sureya if I wanted to, on a random day, right? Let alone to be like, hey, can we just talk on the phone and like get to know each other a little bit? I mean, she's pretty cool. I think you might be like, yeah, that sounds interesting, dude. Give me a call. Like I'll be, whatever. I don't know. You had a cat, so I'll be cleaning my kitty litter box tonight at like 7:50 to 8:05. So call me. We'll chat while I scrape poop. But in this way we get a chance to talk about things that are meaning, like we lead with our own life story first with people who are interested in it, and we lead with our passions. And I don't know, outside of like a dating environment or with like a really good friend where you get to lead with your passions. And one of the things about having a podcast is that we get to interact with people where we're leading with our passions and they're leading with theirs, and we get to meet in the middle and have meaningful conversations. So to the podcast gods,
hopefully inspire other people, right? I mean,
that's
people hear Sureya's story, they start going, wait a minute, this is making some wheels turn. Maybe I can pursue some of my own inner authentic feelings of things. This person did it, why not me?
That's right. Why not you? So thanks for coming. Thanks again for coming on. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. And for Sureya and Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.